What's up? This is David Lee Kim, co-founder of Omniscient Digital, and you're listening to The Long Game. In this episode, we chat with Devin Bramhall. Devin is a marketing advisor with over 15 years of B2B marketing and leadership experience at startups and agencies. She's a former CEO of Animalz, a content marketing agency focused on B2B SaaS companies, where she grew revenue by almost 200% in 2 years. She's a fervent storyteller and a founder of The Master Slam, a poetry slam style debate about startups and tech. She's also a TEDx organizer and speaker trainer and has competed in several storytelling competitions. She created a popular General Assembly workshop that's still taught today called How to Use Storytelling to Get What You Want. In this conversation, we talk about her path into content. It was catalyzed when she worked at a childbirth center in Indonesia. You're going to want to hear that story. We build up to how she landed as CEO of Animalz and why she ultimately stepped down from that role. We talk about leadership, career growth, and her lessons learned as CEO. We also talk about the future of content marketing, AI's role in that future, and how content marketers need to continue evolving. Here's my conversation with Devin Bramhall. Hey, Devin, I'm so glad you're here. Welcome to The Long Game.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so we're going to jump straight into things. I know that a lot of your previous interviews have been about your time at Animalz. Before we get into that part, I want to rewind and start about your content origin story. And I want to ask this because I don't think I've met a single person who planned to be a content marketer or an SEO. Like that's not like a career journey you want to be when you're a teenager or something. And a lot of us kind of fall into it by happenstance one way or another. So how did you end up in content in the first place?
Well, first of all, content didn't exist when I was a teenager or when I was a young adult. So it didn't really, there wasn't a thing to aspire to, but I became a content marketer in a birth room, really. This is legit. This is not like no PR company made this for me. Like this is actually true. So in my 20s, I was working for a startup for about 9 months and went through my quarter life crisis where I was super self-centered and self-important and thought I needed to do something interesting. Very long story short, I left the country. I went to Bali to work for a maternal child health clinic that my mom helped create a program, like an education program with the founder, Robin Lim. And I came there to run a student and volunteer program. Like I am not a midwife. I didn't go to medical school. I don't know anything about it, except that my mom has been a midwife, a home birth midwife for most of my adult life. And they behind the scenes decided that I was going to attend a birth so I could like understand the mission of the clinic. But they didn't tell me. And so like randomly in the middle of the night, one night I get a call from Robin Lim, the founder, and she's like, Devin, come down to the clinic, which PS was like, I walked down a set of stairs from like the the one room I was living in upstairs, walked through like a chicken coop, through the kitchen into the and like she's sitting out there sewing or something. And there's this like woman laboring in the background. Anyway, I helped deliver a baby and it has a huge impact on my life. So I go home and write about it at like 4:00 in the morning while the sun rises. I turn it into a blog post on my blog for my trip to Bali, which every basic white girl ever has done. And when I eventually go back to Boston and I'm starting my career and trying to figure out what I want to do, I'm working in customer support for a startup. I start doing stand-up storytelling. And I launch with this story and the story ends up winning thing after thing. I end up in the finals, whatever. And it really instigates my love of writing. And so I started applying that at my startup. I started trying to do more things there, writing long emails, blog posts, etc., getting my hands on any writing project I can do. And that's really how I realized like, oh, the thing I love customer support is like writing long notes, convincing people that they don't hate us and like writing these product marketing blog posts for launches, etc. Like I really got into that side of it. And so it was through that I was like, okay, this is what I want to do for a living. Like, I want to be a content marketer specifically. And the rest is history.
You know, what's funny was as I was preparing for this interview, I saw your LinkedIn. I saw you worked in Bali at that organization. I was like, how do these things tie together? And there it is. You threaded the needle perfectly. Probably the most unique story of how I heard someone land in content.
Well, it sort of extends, right? Because how many content marketers do you know who became CEOs? Right. And it's like the sort of my whole career is full of, things that seem random. Like, how did that happen? But then you go into the weeds and you see all the actions I've taken and how they've influenced me. And it actually ends up making a lot of sense. So,
yeah. So maybe we can get to that. How would you talk about the narrative of, okay, you were working at this birth center in Bali to moving into tech and content and focusing on a writing career, and eventually you landed at Animalz. So how would you talk about the milestones that led you to CEO of Animalz?
Somewhat traditional. I moved up the ranks and I was really, I was good at advocating for myself. So, I got the opportunity at SpringPad, which was the startup I was working for, where I transformed from customer service to content marketing. And like, I went after that. I was strategic. I went to the CEO, Jeff Chow, and I was like, this is what I want to do. And he's like, buddy up with Jacqueline because she's going to be the new CEO. I did that. She gave me the opportunity I wanted. And then like, I don't know, 8 or 9 months later, another startup came to me and they were like, hey, do you want to do customer support? And I said, no, I do content marketing now. And I want to manage a team. Like, I wouldn't let them offer me. They tried so hard to give me this role. They're like, what if we give you both departments and you can like hire a person? And I was like, great. And so like, I was like, I want this title. So I was always really focused on, title, responsibility, and pay. The pay at that time went a lot slower. Like, I see the content marketers now who are like making so much money and they're like,
it's a lot more than what
I'm like, you would be paid what I was paid back then. Like, it's crazy. I'm like, I was a manager making like $75,000 a year. Like, it was, so anyway, so it was very like, I moved up the ranks. I was like, and I didn't know exactly my destination. What I knew was that I loved being in a creative field and I loved leading. It was hard. I was motivated by the challenge. And in content marketing, I could lead and still be immersed in creativity. And that was really fun for me. So I just continued to move through different companies, landed at Help Scout, job of your dreams. Back then, when you were a content marketer, like that was the place you wanted to land because they were one of the like, they're like, AppQs, Wistia, like I'm from Boston. So obviously those are my darlings. They really cared about content. They did incredible work. It was such an incredible team. Oh my gosh. I've never had so much fun creatively as when I worked there. And that's how I learned about Animalz. So they were an agency that Help Scout was working with. My boss, Sunit, introduced me to Walter, and we worked with them a little bit. And then when I was fired from Help Scout, I was kind of like freelancing, et cetera. And then Sunit said, hey, you should see if Walter needs help. And so I was originally just going to tap him for freelance work. But he said, because that was sort of my career, like up until that point, I was moving up the ranks to be a boss. I knew I did not want to be a CMO. I never wanted to be a CMO. That job felt like garbage to me. Why
not?
Oh, it's not. It's like it's all business.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not actually creative or strategic at all. It's like all business, and it's business in the ways that I didn't find
interesting. What's the pipeline numbers? What are the lead numbers?
You don't even really get vision as a CMO. You're kind of assigned the vision. You kind of like have to give it to other. It's not. It's an amazing role for people who like it. It did not serve my interests. So then I thought I was just going to be a freelancer. But talked to Walter. He needed help on the agency side. I'd never worked agency side. I got to be a VP. Actually, technically, I think I started as a director, but it was like a move. It was a move in my career that added something. It was a next salary level that I wanted. And then I got to move into VP. So like, and at that point, VP was fine. Like I didn't really know that I wanted to be CEO until actually it wasn't that much time at all. I joined in March of 2018, and that summer was when I looked at Walter and I said, I pointed right out.
There's like a story, right? I think Jimmy was saying it was at an offsite, and it wasn't like a one-on-one. Like you said in front of everyone, "I want your job," to Walter.
I pointed at him, like quite literally. I pointed right at him. Yeah. And Walter, to his credit, he was really cool about it. He went on Chris Savage's podcast a few years ago and talked about it. And Chris was like, "Weren't you like? Didn't you feel like I don't know, put apart? Like, was that threatening to you or whatever?" And Walter's like, "No." He's like, "I think being CEO, like, it takes kind of a crazy person to be CEO." And he's like, if she's crazy enough to want it, like, I actually think that's kind of cool. Like, if that's something that you're like going after, like, I like that. And he was really supportive. So
you said something interesting that was kind of in passing, but I think it goes contrary to a lot of platitudes. People say, like, don't worry about the title. But what you said was, no, I cared about the title. That's what I wanted, which I have another good friend, Joe Lee, who's VP at Entra now. He did that early on in his career too. He was like, I worked at an unsexy company, but I got the VP title. And that has probably put me ahead of a lot of people because I was willing to work for an unsexy company. I think Help Scout was very sexy at the time. Like, I'll give you a lot of credit here. I remember when I was really focused on content and SEO, Help Scout was one of those blogs that you always go to for inspiration. So now I know that you were the person behind all of that.
I wasn't the only person. There were many people working on it, but I was there for a time and a very transformative time for them. So I do take credit for that. But title, okay, anyone who says title doesn't matter doesn't know what they're talking about, honestly. And there is some nuance to that. So the same title isn't weighted the same at every company. So if you're smart, you understand that, right? Like if you want to move in your career, you have to understand how the business works. You don't have to be an expert. You don't have to go to business school. I didn't. I was homeschooled. I got my GED and I did not go to business school, and I got to be CEO and I made them a ton of money. So like, but the title matters. So at smaller startups, title and responsibility. Sorry. The responsibility is an important piece too, because you need experience in order to execute your title well. And that does matter. Like if you switch jobs and you do a bad job at your title, like you're dead in the water, right? So, for me, it was moving from content marketing manager with no team as an individual contributor to content marketing manager who managed a team. And then I forget what my other title was. And then director at Help Scout. Director at Help Scout was huge because if you're a director at like a huge corporation, like you're leading a team of like hundreds of people potentially. And that's like a really big job. And so directors and then VP and then I'm telling you, the engagement on my posts on LinkedIn when I had CEO in my title were like off the charts. Like there's a lot of stuff that flows downriver for you. And that's a very small example when you're a CEO. Like people just care about you more. And I know that that's unfortunate, but like it's true. And I think, and this is another like unfortunate reality that like I have to just acknowledge, if you're any type of minority leader, aka like not a white male leader, it just so happens that the world has caught on to this, and they're and on its most sinister, it's superficial. DEI has become this like very superficial thing, unfortunately, where like people are like want to show that they're inclusive by showcasing people who are not white male, like, you know what I mean? But like, I hate to say it, but it does also give like the sinister parts of the world also end up benefiting people in a way where it's like, well, then you get more exposure. So like being a female leader, I'm not even like, I don't even really count as a minority anymore, but like technically there aren't that many female leaders, and like that gets you some attention. Right. And so like the title matters. Like it does. I don't think that it means that you can't do anything without a title, but like, guess what? It matters in terms of how much you're exposed to at a company, and the amount you're exposed to at a company ups your skill level I see so many people in like manager and director roles who like don't really understand the business unit well enough to know how to lead their team effectively.
Yeah.
And I'm like, because I was always gunning for that, no matter where. I mean, I used to sit in a room with like a bunch of white guys like yelling at each other, but I was like, I was the only non-leadership person in that room because of the responsibilities that I took on and the investment that I made. And so like I got to learn a lot. And then my next role was director, right? So anyway, I think the title matters a lot, the responsibilities, and then the ownership you take. And just like I was a pain in the ass. I annoyed the shit out of people, but I got given more exposure and opportunities than some others.
I love that. So you moved into CEO, and under your leadership, the company grew revenue. I think it was 200%. I imagine
We were like because we were at, oh my God, it's like history. I think we had done 3 or 3.5 in 2019, and we did 6, a little over 6 in 2020, and then 11 and a half in 2021.
Wow. So what were I'm not going to start with challenges because I think everyone goes there first. What did you realize that you were really fucking good at when you stepped in as CEO?
Vision. And in the beginning, it was like, I was good at that. And I was good at team culture. Like the culture was really good. I think the culture thing ended up being empathy, and empathy was what ended up being the thing that kind of like destroyed me. But vision, like even after the big workforce changes, when it was like impossible to please anyone, no matter what you did, like I knew how to activate them and get them excited about stuff. Like that is my sweet spot. Is like I can rally people around an idea, I have good idea. Like my visions are very like they're compelling, they're interesting, they're unique, they're like presented in a different way. Like during the pandemic, I would write these like long notes to my team. Like one of them started off with was like something like, I've been thinking a lot about eels. And like people used to cry, like it was a whole, right? And like all of that is like the storytelling, the vision, and then again, like sort of translating that into how you treat your team, how you care about your team, how you lead your team. Those were all, and I was good at selling. I was good at like, I think that's sort of I don't want to sell that part of me short. Like, I knew content marketing in and out. I knew how to get the same thing I could do with my team, I did with customers, right? Like I could get them really on board with an idea, like a real idea, something you could actually do, right? I'm not making stuff up. I'm not selling snake oil. I was like I could just look at someone or listen to someone on a call and know exactly what they needed to do and how to talk to them in a way that they could hear me. I take charge in a lot of conversations, which gets me in trouble, but it also wins me a lot. That confidence, people are looking for that left and right. And I can tell you that as a CEO, I was begging for people to have confidence around me and tell me something true. And that's rare. That's very rare. Those two together, especially.
So you kind of alluded to this, but the empathy kind of being the thing that kind of was counterproductive is how I'm interpreting it. So maybe that leads into like, why did you decide to ultimately step down? Like, what were the challenges that led to that?
Yeah. I mean, there's sort of like a superficial thing and sort of like the internal thing that like sort of I stopped having the energy for. And that internal thing was sort of, I realized I had led in a way that my desire was, this was the whole concept. This has been my dream as a leader and the thing I was dying to fulfill that was completely wrong. But I was like, I just want to show that you can lead a successful company and be great and do great work and not be an asshole.
Yeah.
It was my desire to not be an asshole that caused me to lead in ways that were unproductive. I sought my team's approval too much. And I created a monster, basically. And that there were areas where I should have held stronger ground. I shouldn't have tried to please them. I should have just said, no, I'm not going to do this. Or I don't believe, like kind of been okay with taking a stance on things and making decisions that I knew all of the team wouldn't be happy with. The other thing I did, and this is such a rookie move, it makes me so sad that I was like the most basic in this way, but I listened too hard to a small group of people who are strong, like the loud ones. Mm. It's the first lesson in customer support. There's this group of loud people that as an early customer support person, I would go to my engineers and be like, this is a big problem. And they're like, how many people? I would say one, but he told me I was ugly. Truly, I've been told I was ugly over email before from people who never see me because they were mad about one feature. And I'm like, why did I listen to that guy? It was a guy, by the way. But it's like, you listen to the people who are the meanest and you listen to people who are the loudest. And I did that. And it was such a mistake. There are people I should have, like, there's just, culture is more than just making people happy. Culture is making decisions that keeps everyone together. And I made such a rookie mistake. I wanted people to like me. I wanted them to tell me I was good. And that is a mistake.
If it's okay to ask, because I think it's a pretty interesting time in terms of, you mentioned DEI, like there's a lot of different things that, at least in the news, we hear about these big corporations and employees protesting and things like that. Like, are you able to share any specific examples of like when you listened to a small group of people and made the wrong decision?
Okay. When I say small groups of people, I don't mean like a small, like racial or minority group. Like that is not what I mean.
No, not like that.
A random group of people come together
numbers
because they just are never going to be happy with anything, right? The DEI stuff I actually think was deeply important. The disappointing thing was, DEI doesn't work unless you have executive sponsorship. So even behind the scenes, there were times when things like we need to hire certain leadership roles, and I was screaming about it. I was like, we need to, and so, we had a bunch of people who wanted to run all these initiatives, and we were like, great, let's start a task force. I was in every single meeting, right? I was like, I have to kick this off, right? And it was interesting because we had these groups, and we tried to give different people ownership of different initiatives so we could do multiple things at once. And granted, that stuff, the first pushback is well, are you going to make time for this? And I'm like, and an agency, it's okay, yes, but also we're all investing extra time in this, right? And so then it comes down to this, it ended up sort of coming down to this argument of are you going to take more work off my plate so I can do this thing? And I'm like, but to a point, right? And we already had the lowest workload of any company. I've talked to so many other agencies and they were how did you keep the lights on? Right? And we did have good margins, by the way, and then people who just never followed through. And so there's sort of this demoralizing aspect of and then you get this other group of people who are they don't care about blah, blah, blah. And you're like, wait a second, and so it's I think in hindsight, all I needed to do was say and demonstrate, this thing is important to me. Here's what I have to invest in it right now. I know it's not enough. Mm-hmm. And I know that this is going to make some of you feel like you don't believe me. And I'm sorry, but this is what we're going to do. And I think instead I just kept screaming. I kept trying to, I kept trying to make things work. And I kept seeking. And I think when you come from a place of seeking approval, I think that is such an easy way to lead to bitterness. It's such a surprising thing that I never really understood until I went through it. But you have to, boundaries can make people love you.
Yeah.
But love should never be the objective when you're running a company. And I think that's hard for a lot of people to hear, especially when there's so many examples of companies who don't care. But saying your objective isn't for people to love you doesn't mean you don't also love your people and want to make them happy. Mm-hmm. And it's a really confusing nuance to understand unless you've been in that thing. I used to say, I wish every single person could be CEO for a week. you'd understand the kinds of decisions that like you're faced with and the reason behind the boundaries that people don't get visibility into seeing. And so they come to conclusions based on that, which is unfortunate. So big learning for me. Look, I got my butt kicked. The things I thought were going to be hard for me, like the businessy stuff, finances and planning, all this stuff, that stuff ended up being relatively
straightforward.
simple. Yeah. Once you get past 50 people, it's a lot harder. And I was like, this is the thing I'm good at. I'm going to be great at this. And I was bad, or I made mistakes in areas I didn't even know, like, were mistakes that could be like things that could happen. Right. And after a point, I think I tapped out on that side. Right. That was like the heart-wrenching tap out. Cause I just realized that I wasn't doing it for me anymore. It didn't serve me. I didn't care anymore. I genuinely stopped caring. I was like, I've given everything I can give, and I don't feel the energy I need to feel to keep doing this. It was just draining. It wasn't returning anything back to me. Also leading to a crisis for 2 years. Yeah. It's like, add to that like we were near constant crisis. I was like, I think I handle crisis really well. People kept trying, makes me so mad, this whole burnout thing. People kept trying to assign burnout to me. And I was like, I need you to know that I have been burnt out more times in the past 2 years than like ever in my life. And I chose to overcome it. I chose to work through it. I built I don't give as much favor to the burnout conversation as other people, because I think that people have more power than they think they do. And I had that power even when I was not CEO. It wasn't burnout. You have to care.
Yeah.
And I didn't care. And the other side, the academic side was, we had to make some decisions on where to take the company. And Walter and I had always been really aligned on that. And like, we were sort of aligned, but not perfectly. And I realized, I was like, you know what? We're just going to fight about this. And like, my job is to make this company, like my job is to protect the company. That's a CEO's job. And I was like, if I stay here and fight with you about this, like, A, I don't want to fight with you because like, look at the career you've given me. Right. And B, I'm like, the company's going to suffer. And so pairing the other experience, this experience, it was the easiest decision I've made in a long time. I actually didn't have to think about it that much. It was very technical. And I was like, okay, I'm done.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that and being vulnerable. I know there's going to be people listening to just like, whoa, did she really share all that stuff? I
think more leaders should. Leading is a heart-wrenching thing. And I think that a lot of leaders make is that they try to put on a face for their team. And look, you definitely should, right? Leaders shouldn't be like going out and like melting down. But I did notice a few strategic times where I did show vulnerability, both internally and externally. I wrote a LinkedIn post where I said something like, I feel deep personal shame every time I make a mistake. That's how it started. And I remember a lot of people reaching out to me being like, oh my God, thank you. Like, we don't see that. So I think that demonstrating that vulnerability actually helps upcoming leaders, helps your team, et cetera. I think it's important.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think for the listeners, like we had talked about DEI from the lens of like, hey, they're as an example of small group of people like wanting to push for certain initiatives, but DEI is important. I'm a brown man from low-income family, Cambodian American, so know all about it. I just know there's going to be people listening being like, whoa, did they just say DE&I is not important?
No, it's very important. That is why we focused on it actively the entire time. Like there were no DI initiatives when I joined. Right. And like, that was look, it's hard at agencies. I get it, but we changed our entire hiring process multiple times.
Yeah.
To make it to refine it for that specifically. Like we did so much behind the scenes to support that. And it's still, I'm telling you, it wasn't enough. It's actually very difficult because I've been that token hire. I was the only one of my managers, the first time I was hired as a manager, I walked in that office and I was like, oh, I am the only woman. I hired the second, and so I get it. It's hard to not like, it's a balance of like not tokenizing people and investing in it in systematic ways where it's a part of how the business runs and thrives. And that was my true belief. I was like, content marketing is very white and until recently very male. I think that's starting to balance out a little bit more. And I was like, our mission was to make the internet a more helpful place. I was like, internet's not going to be more helpful if we're only writing for one group of people and from one person's perspective. I was like, if we're filling that funnel with talent that is influencing all these companies, and then that talent is going off to work for other companies too, I was like, it starts with us. And that's why that mission was never going to be fulfilled, because we were to me, we were the origin story of that mission, being an agency. And I was like, it was never going to be enough, but you just have to keep trying.
Did not expect to go down that rabbit hole. I'm going to pull us out. We're going to switch gears a little bit. So we're more than halfway in. We haven't even talked about content yet. So there's a lot of hype right now, as you know, around generative AI, like Jasper, ChatGPT, and all of those. What's your take on all of this? Is the content marketer's job going away? How do you see the world, like the content of future of content marketing playing out?
I've been experimenting with it too, actually, which has been fun. So one, I think focusing on it from is the content marketer's job going away is boring and reductive. It's very like, wah, wah. And I think there's a lot of wah, wah right now, and I'm totally bored by it. I think what's my stance has never changed. AI is going to be a great helper. It already is. I've used it multiple times to create some graphics recently that have been very useful. I tried to use it to write a LinkedIn post and it didn't work because, and this is something that Bernard at ClearScope just said on a podcast, that he crystallized it really well for me. The reason why the LinkedIn post didn't work is because AI doesn't contribute anything new to the conversation. It's synthesizing what exists. Therefore, it makes a great helper. It can help with very like sort of foundational stuff. It can help, with, if you give it the right structure, it can help you with like, I even think it can help with an outline, right? Help with idea generation, help with sort of that like baseline content that you can augment, right? It can help you with the teasing out process, right? It can probably even produce headlines pretty easily. Like I imagine on the paid side of things, it's already super useful, right? So I think it's a really useful helper, but because it cannot contribute anything new to the conversation, creatively or otherwise, right? Then it's never going to be able to produce as interesting work as a human can do. They can't tie these things together as well as a human can do. They can't come up with new ideas. They can't analyze well. I think one of the examples that Bernard shared that was really helpful was that like AI for like politics, right?
Oh,
like how do you like it can't like they can't like synthesize a movable entity and topic that's right? It's like they're taking what's already there and giving you sort of like a combination of those things to answer whatever question you have or the paragraph you want it to write for you or whatever. But it's not putting things together and necessarily like super new. It doesn't have any new thoughts. And because of that, for now, it's a great helper. I'm enjoying experimenting with it. It's not writing my LinkedIn post for me. Wah, wah. But I think it's helpful. It's helpful. That's what I think. Yeah. It's helpful. And I think that like, when you think about like, what that frees your minds up for, like if it can it's still finding its place. I think people are still trying to figure out where its place resides. But if it can help with some of that foundational stuff, especially in the areas of like research, like how can it do research? Like how can it just like automate certain things, right? So that you can spend your brain on a data set, on a set of work and make it unique without having to spend all that extra. Like I think imagine all the extra brain space, right? If you take away a third focused on something that like isn't using your brain in an active way, imagine what else you're going to be able to come up with creatively. Like this is potentially an opportunity for humans to reach a next level of creativity themselves, which I think is pretty exciting. So
I love it. I was actually just working on an article right before our call, and I used ChatGPT to spin up an outline, and I was like, don't like that, going to edit a couple things. And I was like, okay, what should the headline or angle should this article should take? And I was like, here's a headline example, give me 10 different alternatives to this. And it gave me a bunch. I'm like, yep, I like a couple of these. Let's keep going down a rabbit hole and try it out. Versus before, what would you do? You sit there and you type out 10, 20 headlines and keep doing that process. It might take an hour or more.
God. Yeah. It takes forever.
Yeah, even creating outlines takes a long time.
Oh, that was the hardest part of our, I mean, like to this day, the way our writing process at Animalz, like the outline's the hard, because that's when you're making all the decisions, right? It's like,
yeah.
Another really good example that I experienced just this week was I was trying to get Dolly to make an image for me, and I needed it. You know, the emoji of the woman crossing her hands?
Yeah.
I wanted it to make like an abstract version of that. So like do it as a line drawing. I tried all these different inputs, but the thing that it couldn't process, and it took me a few tries before I realized it, is I said like line drawing of woman crossing hands emoji. It could only interpret it as or I think I tried it with the cartwheel one too. And it's like woman cartwheeling and an emoji. So it either gave me a woman cartwheeling or it gave me and I was like, oh, like I see now. You can't like that level of description, or I haven't learned how to give it the right inputs, but it wasn't able to put those things where a designer, I'd be like, hey, I want to create a like logo for my new podcast that's like, or like an image to represent it. That's like the woman crossing hands emoji, but I don't want to use a legitimate emoji. Abstract it out. I'm looking for a line drawing, transparent background, like push the limits on me here and here. You know what I mean? And like, give me 5 versions.
Yeah.
You couldn't do it.
Is this a hint towards your next project?
Yes.
When are you ready to talk about some details there? I'm very curious what's going on, what you're working on.
Yes, I can give you a little bit. I've purposely been very quiet about it, mostly because my partner and I are talking about go-to-market strategy on Friday. So this has been in the works since the fall. And my friend and I, Margaret Kelsey, who's another badass marketer, she's like Intercom, app queues, OpenView, like she's been at it forever. She's a legend. We wanted to make a podcast, and we want to talk about content marketing still. We have a lot of very strong opinions about content marketing, and a lot of the discussions that are had currently online are so boring. Like it's the same thing over and over. And so we spent some time really figuring out what we wanted that to look like, how we wanted to talk about it, what we wanted to talk about. And we're working with this amazing production company, Share Your Genius. And they helped, like, we had these like ideas, and they really put it together for us to help us figure out like, oh, we're taking a stance here. And it's going to be called Don't Say Content, and it's coming out in February. And I'm very excited about it. And we're talking about the thing we love the most. That has never changed. But we're coming at it from a different way. So we'll see.
It sounds like a thing. Is it going to be like, if you say content on the show, you have to take a shot or something?
We have a list, actually. I am not joking. Like, we had an all-day planning meeting, and there were these words that we were like, I hate that word. I hate that word. And the first word word we hated the most was content. And then there was a whole bunch so we actually have a list, and we were like, there's going to be a thing that you have to do. I think we're going to make money for charity, basically. It's like anytime any of us says it, we have to put some money in a jar and donate it, because there's a lot of annoying words in our.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting because like you're going to be starting a podcast, and what I've noticed is this trend of, I don't know what else to call it besides B2B influencers. Like before, I think influencer marketing tended to be mostly B2C, like people on Instagram posting about this product they're using, or like mostly beauty products or health products. But in B2B SaaS, there's now people posting on LinkedIn, getting thousands of likes and comments. There's you like getting a lot of engagement on LinkedIn. Like you are one of those people. There's Dave Gerhardt. There's a bunch of other folks in the space now. And I'm just wondering how that changes the content marketing or just marketing in general. Like when you're trying to do marketing for a B2B SaaS company, should that be a big part of the strategy? Like it's no longer just blogs anymore, right?
Yeah, I agree. I think I actually said this on a LinkedIn Live with Ashley recently, where I was like, blogs are dead. They're not important anymore. And I like meant it, but it's like, that's full of nuance. But I was like, yeah, who cares? Like another 5 years, like no one's going to be reading them. And I didn't make that up, right? Like there's a trend towards different types of media. So like audio in various formats, including podcasts, video in various formats. Like I didn't make that trend up. It hasn't stopped. It's going to continue. And so like, I think that, and I think there needs to be a turnover in influencer too. I think there's a lot of people who've been in the space a long time who are really smart, have really interesting things to share, but we kind of know what their stance is already. And it's remarkable. There's a lot of like people who are out there talking who have like, there's sort of like the Dave Gerhardt level where he was in early, and like Anne Hanley, like there are these like sort of larger, like, then there's this huge space of people who are sort of like, really smart too, but they have like, they just have different, like the way their brand is like, it's, I don't know how to describe it, but so I think there needs to be more voices saying more contrarian things to each other. There needs to be more argument.
Yes.
Marketing is so like warm, fuzzy. They're always like, oh, we need to like argue with each other a little bit more in a very productive, constructive way. I am so over everyone.
No calling each other ugly.
Oh my God. No whining. Stop whining, everyone. Like take charge of your life, for goodness sake. But anyway, I think there needs to be more debate, and, and so that's the way that I'm coming at this is like, Margaret and I decided that we are making this for ourselves. Like we're making this for people who are like, have been in it a long time, have heard every basic argument. Like if I hear category creation one more time, like that's on the list. You're not going to say it. So we're making this to inspire people like us who have just been at it for a long time, right? There's so many beginner podcasts to help people learn content marketing and get in the weeds. We really want to take an approach of like, where's it going? What do we find interesting? What corner of the world, like what the heck is happening with social media and community building and distribution? Like all of those things are basically the same thing, but like what are like no playbooks work anymore. Organic, to be reductive, organic social media for B2B SaaS doesn't work. But like, what's the next thing then? And I think that's where people are using the name community. They're saying, well, it's community now, but I'm like, do you even know what you're saying? Like, tell me then,
what does that mean?
B2B SaaS company, what does community building look like to you? What is it? And it's like, and so anyway, those are the kinds of things we want to unpack is like, okay, stop saying community to me. What specifically are you doing? What is your stance? What is your belief? What is your hypothesis? What are you testing? And then what happened? And then what are you going to do after that? Like, that's where the conversation starts to get really interesting. You can take your playbook and burn it. I don't want to hear about it. I don't care. I want you to tell me what you're trying, what happened, all the ways you analyzed it, and then what your next step was. And those that like, that's what we're going to be. That's the thing that gets me not bored anymore. That was the worst thing I've ever said in my life. That's what makes me interested and inspired again. And so, and that's why we think if we're not bored, we can help our listeners be less bored. And let me tell you, we are not trying to be like, we are catering to a small industry within a small industry, right? Content marketing within the like the software industry, right? Like those are
Mhm.
Software's still really small. Content marketing is still really small. We're not trying to like, we're intentionally focused on the community in which we've grown up in and care a lot about. We don't need to be like global, like the next, whatever, Joe Rogan. We're like, that's not the goal. We want to we want to activate the community around us. And that's success to us, because that's what would make us interested. Because now we're starting conversations with more and more people, and that keeps us inspired. Hopefully it ups our game, because now we're both consultants. We need to find a way to keep being challenged, et cetera. So
I love it.
For us, hopefully it's fun and informative for other people.
Well, I'm looking forward to that. One thing that we did, I love how you're very intentionally niching down. Everyone talks about niching down, and they choose like a topic, and it's like, that's a very broad topic. Like you can have a whole podcast series about community and all the different things that means. And we realized that as well, where in the beginning, when we started the agency, we were like, we're not going to write how to do content marketing or what is content marketing. Like, it's 2020, like everyone knows what this is. And if they don't, we don't want to speak to them. We're going to write about the nuances and the stuff that people are actually discussing. Like I just did a podcast interview with, I think, Joey Chan. She might've been, yeah. And we went into the nuances of like, hey, yeah. But we went into the nuance of like, hey, why do content marketers get paid less than demand gen marketers? Let's talk about that, and why demand gen marketers need content marketers. So why is no one talking about that? So I love that you're going to be going deep into the nuances of the industry and like calling out the things that people aren't talking about.
Yes, because why have we like that question is actually really important, because the reason why demand gen gets more money is because it's like a 1-to-1 ratio of like spend to results, right?
Yes.
And how that phenomenon has become problematic for content marketing, because we have gotten that, plus us getting much better, like technology evolving to be able to measure the performance of content better, has reduced content marketing into they've tried to make it too much like demand gen, where it's like, we're going to do this thing and our expectation is this one article is going to produce. And I'm like, that's content marketing is about brand. That's it. That is what it's there for. And so like, that's that question. Yes. That question is very interesting to me. And I wish I was a fly on the wall for that conversation, because I would have had a lot to say.
I know we're coming up on time and we should wrap up, but we need to have you on for part 2, because what you just said there, content is for brand, I strongly disagree with, though I understand where you're coming from. So we need to fight.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
We need to fight on that.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Okay. Focus topic. That's like a 30-minute lightning round of like, let's have at it.
Oh yeah. We're going to have a part 2 for sure. But in the meantime, let's wrap us up for today, and then we'll schedule a part 2 here. So, I'd love to just close with a couple like rapid fire questions, or you can spend a little bit more time on them. I was going to ask about an opinion you disagree with in business, but there's plenty of that in our whole conversation already. I think we hit our quota there. So what's one impactful piece of advice that you've been given?
Oh, geez. One impactful piece. Oh, this came from my coach. She said it to me over a year ago, and I didn't understand what it meant until now. She said, when there's nothing left to burn, you have to set yourself on fire. And when she said that to me, I didn't understand how to interpret it. And now that I have reached this point in my career, I realized that burning doesn't necessarily mean an act of anger or vengeance or destruction. It actually is a rebirth. And I think that there is a strength and bravery required to rethink something that you've always held to be true. So the way I ended up applying it was with my career. But there have been multiple times in my career where I held a belief about something creatively, process, the way content marketing works. Like, for example, like certain playbooks I've really been dedicated to in the past, certain beliefs about social media even, right? Like I'm being forced to like quite literally rethink everything about that. And what that invites is a complete, like it's a blank slate. When you are willing to set everything, when you set yourself on fire, to me, what you're doing is you're removing all of your beliefs, all of your experience, all your preconceived notions, and allowing yourself to take in like net new information and think about it in completely new ways. And that to me is the birth of a completely new wave of creativity for yourself that is transformative, exciting, life-changing, both for you and the people around you. And it took me over a year to finally understand what that meant. And I feel like I'm living that right now. And I'm busier than I've been in a while, and I'm having so much fun.
That's awesome. Some people don't learn that for an entire lifetime. So I'm glad that you landed at that. I think some folks call that beginner's mind.
Yeah.
But I like setting myself on fire better.
It feels very powerful. Like it does, like in an energetic way. Like it makes me feel like really.
You can visualize it.
Yeah. I'm like, I'm not an infant. I've been here. I have the scars. Setting myself on fire feels like I am in complete ownership of my life and it feels really like powerful and exciting to me. So that's the one I'm adopting now.
Great. What's one book that you would recommend more people read?
Fiction. Any work of fiction. Oh, The Power. Recommended to me by my friend Jen Hirsch. The Power is a really good one. And The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Okay. I have not read.
I need you to know that I've read a handful of business books in my life. And so anytime anyone's like, have you read XYZ book? No, I don't read business books. Not because there's a few that Walter recommended to me. One that one of my content managers recommended to me that I now can't remember, which is annoying, but that were very useful. But for the most part, a lot of those business books are written for people to build their personal brand and careers, and they're very boring. And they could be distilled into a book. I read fiction to get inspired. I read fiction to figure out how to do my job. Like I'm not.
I love it.
Yeah. So.
All right. So where can people find you on the internet?
Right now, LinkedIn. Like that's pretty much the only place I spend time. If you want to see my personal life, you can go to Instagram, but that's not like my work place. The place where you see me most relevantly is LinkedIn, and you'll be seeing more of me. And pretty soon you'll see more about Don't Say content.
Amazing. And you'll be doing all the influencing on LinkedIn. I
think so. Pick a block. I mean, like Twitter's a dumpster fire. Facebook is irrelevant, and Instagram's for my friends and family. So
yeah. All right. Makes sense. Great. Well, Devin, it was so great to have you on a show.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a really fun conversation.